South Africa could reduce load shedding by one stage if demand is reduced by households through switching off geysers and delaying the charging of inverters. That's according to this week's briefing on the National Energy Action Plan, and government may soon be able to implement a court order for uninterrupted supply of power to hospitals, schools and clinics through a grant from the Chinese government and businesses. Govan Whittles joins us now in studio to discuss the details of this briefing. Govan, let's start with reducing load shedding to at least by a stage. How soon are we, or close are we to that possibility?
That'll probably happen within the next few weeks, Clement. And what's important to note here is that the government believes that they can't ease this plague of stage 6 that's been going around during the winter. Remember, we were told to brace for a difficult winter. It's here. Stage 6 is here. And now the only way that they could provide relief to South Africans is if South Africans themselves reduce the demand on the electricity grid. They've highlighted two ways in which that could happen. The first is to switch off the geysers, which the government says its studies show consume about 50% of household power and is responsible for about 11 to 15% of the entire national peak demand. So that is a significant amount of power which is taken by geysers. And essentially they want South Africans to switch them off during the peak times. So that would be in the morning and in the evening, presumably after you've had a shower or use the hot water. But then, of course, there's also the matter of inverters. Here's the interesting part from this briefing. They say that the charging of inverters, which charge automatically once the power comes back on, usually at 8 o'clock, sometimes at 10 o'clock, adds up to one stage of load shedding. So the inverters being charged take about, in totality across the country, 1,000 megawatts. And they say that if you could just switch off your inverter, wait until the peak period has passed, so between midnight and 4 a.m., wake up again, switch it on, have it charged during that time, then we could reduce load shedding even further. So all of this coming from that briefing by the National Energy Crisis Committee. And we have a few comments from the head of the presidency's project management division, Rudy Dix, who was outlining this call for a reduction in demand. Let's take a look at it.
The most important and the most urgent intervention that we can have right now is by curbing load shedding over the winter, and that is by reducing our demand, right? And it's possible to reduce demand by 1,000 megawatts. So what we're asking for as a minimum is for us to support a campaign to reduce our demand by 1,000 megawatts. That's one stage of load shedding, and it makes it very, very significant, and that's going to be important. Back to basics. Switch off electricity geysers at peak times. Actual fact, before we start over there, I just wanted to give you'll see there's an information note in the right-hand corner. So just an important information note around geysers, for example, right? So the residential sector consumes 24 to 25% of electricity, or 35% of total peak demand, right? Geysers, water heating, consumes the greatest amount of electricity, which drives peak demand. That's about 30 to 50% of household consumption. Right? Therefore, water heating contributes overall about 11 to 18% of peak demand overall. If we simply switch off our geysers, we're able to reduce significantly that demand that's there. And that data is quite important for us to illustrate why it's still important for us to switch off the geyser, or those who have money and have resources to put in smart meters to reduce your demand during the peak time so that we are able to sparingly use electricity. So switching off geysers and switching the temperature to 60 degrees, this is very, very important. We can do this as a simple technology that we can introduce.
So, Govan, over the last months that the electricity minister has been in charge, we've seen him say things that contradict what his counterpart, Govan Whittles, says. First, it's about whether or not you can end load shedding by the end of the year. Govan Whittles thinks it's possible. The electricity minister says not technically possible. And then there's the issue of car power shift. Govan Whittles says that's our answer to our electricity crisis. 20 years, going to cost us 200 billion rand. What is Hossein Suramakopa's views about car power shift?
Well, the electricity minister believes he has the power to designate what emergency procurement parameters should be in place for a contract like that. It's interesting here, Hossein Suramakopa saying that he doesn't want to talk about car powership the country, the company, but he does support the notion of power ships. The difference between him and the DMRE minister, Govan Whittles, is that he says he's going to limit any power ship deal to 5 years. Asked how he would do so if the tender processes are not under his control, he says that they'll sort out the differences in opinion about the length of the contract in the cabinet. So he'll have a conversation with the minister, and he says he's adamant, and he's described it as a non-negotiable, that that contract should not exceed 5 years.
Yeah. How soon can government implement a court order for this uninterrupted supply of power to the hospitals, the clinics? Because previously, Eskom itself said it's not possible to do so because many of these entities are embedded within communities. So it's not possible to just select a particular hospital or a police station and protect it from stages of load shedding. So what's the plan?
The plan is to ask the Chinese government for help. Then they'll give us grants, solar PVs, generators. Interestingly here, the electricity minister says that he's met with a number of diplomats, number of representatives of other countries, Germany included, some of the other European countries. He says the Chinese have already come back to them, pledged to donate solar and generators, asked to be exempt from taxes for bringing that stuff into the country because it would be considered aid, and that would help them essentially keep the hospitals, schools and clinics online. Right now they say if they had to switch them off, they would have to, or if they had to keep them online right now, they would have to keep the entire neighborhood online, and they believe that advocates for a system collapse, a grid collapse. Essentially they wouldn't be able to manage load shedding. Another interesting comment before we get to that comment on the Chinese grant is that the electricity minister says that when South Africa is at stage 6 and stage 5, they should be happy because it means the system operator at Eskom knows what he's doing and he's preventing a national blackout. So he's saying that the higher stages of load shedding mean that they're in more control of the situation, that they're acting when they're supposed to, and they're preventing something worse from happening, which is the national blackout. I thought that was just a very interesting way to put it, since it is such a frustrating experience. But let's listen to what they have to say about this potential grant from China.
The hospitals, schools, clinics, and police stations, a lot of them are located in areas of concentrated consumption. They will be sharing that with a number of other users. When you come to think of it, there will be a high density of those in your major metropolitan areas. Like I said, those are areas of consumption. Concentrated consumption. So what it means is that the system operator will not have the leverage to balance the system. That's what it means, because once we exempt them, for as long as they don't have a direct line, it means that everyone that feeds off that distribution infrastructure is also will not be load shed, and therefore the system operator's ability to maneuver and get the additional megawatts to be denied of users is diminished, and therefore you are really advocating for a system collapse.
All right, Govan Whittles, thank you so much for that update. Go home under stage 6 and be happy that this is a sign that our authorities know what they're doing.